My name is Cameron Stewart. I'm the Chief International Correspondent with the Australian newspaper. And we're going to move on and broaden it a bit now and talk about alliances. Are alliances, America's alliances, fit for purpose? It's a pretty good topic because after 8 months of the Trump administration, if you read newspapers, which of course you all should do, you would get the impression that alliances are being junked left, right and centre, that they're not fit for purpose. But of course, beyond the headlines, even journalists have to admit that the reality is that alliances are slow-moving beasts that don't move alongside with the headlines of the day. And so the best people to analyse exactly what's happening with this are the three fantastic panellists we've got here today. So can you please welcome Lisa Curtis, Peter Dean and Lavina Lee. Just a quick introduction. Lavina Lee is a prolific author, one of the foremost experts in regional security in Australia. She's got a new role as Director of Foreign Policy and Defence Program at the United States Study Centre. So congratulations, Lavina. Lisa Curtis, who was up here before, of course. Needs a little introduction. She's a 20-year veteran of US government roles, terrifically senior roles, National Security Council, CIA, State Department, Capitol Hill. She's the Director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Centre for New American Security. And the third person up here, of course, to many of you needs no introduction, Peter Dean, foremost defence and security expert, one of the best ones in the country, I think, from a reporter's point of view, really can summarise things very succinctly. And of course, he's now got a new job as well, Chair of Military Strategy at the Australian War College. So congratulations, Peter. Still keeping in touch with the United States Study Centre as well, though, of course. Peter is best known, I think, probably for the Strategic Defence Review, his role as a co-author with that, and his very polite frustration since then at aspects of that not being implemented by the government, which is always very interesting from a reporter's point of view as well. So look, I'm just going to get into it and sit down here. I wanted to ask all of you, first of all, if you could just give me maybe a couple of minute summary on at a macro level. I'll talk about AUKUS and various the Quad and other issues later on, but at a macro level, how has America's security cooperation with the Indo-Pacific changed since the Trump administration came to power, and where's it going? Lisa.
Well, thank you, and thank you for moderating this discussion. I would say that, we all know what's happening on the tariffs front, the trade front, and I'm not going to understate the massive changes that are happening to the trading system. But if you look at the security issues and what's happening, I think we do see a lot more continuity. And I'll give 4 concrete examples of that. The first one would be the Japan-US security relationship. That continues to be very strong. We see that the efforts to transform US Forces Japan into a joint force headquarters is continuing. We've had some recent developments on that. This will, of course, be very important to strengthening command and control capabilities, enhancing joint operational readiness for our 2 countries. So I think that's one concrete example of continuity, what we see. The second, I'll talk about US-India military cooperation and the continued exercises that we see the US and India doing. And just on Sunday, they wrapped up their annual Army-to-Army exercise that happens every year, the Yud-Abbas annual exercise. So even though you have so much static and rhetoric happening between the US and India, still, the militaries continue their cooperation and their exercises. The third example I would give is the US-Philippines relationship. We see that continuing, and the Philippines continues access for the U.S. To do rotational operations there and to stage logistics at 9 bases throughout the Philippines. And even the trilateral initiative between U.S., Japan, Philippines started during the Biden administration. That is continuing. Secretary Rubio has met with his counterparts. The Luzon Corridor Initiative is continuing. So that's all part of the strategic security relationship between the U.S. and the Philippines. And fourth, I would point to something, maybe it's not hard security, but it's maritime security, and that's the Quad Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative. And what we saw in July of this year is the Quad at Sea Observer Mission happening, which, the 4 countries were aboard a U.S. Coast Guard cutter traveling to Guam, so increasing interoperability, their joint maritime domain awareness, so a very important maritime security initiative. So I think these all show that, underneath the surface, U.S., traditional security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific is, steaming along.
Peter?
Look, I think there's a couple of things to build on that. Spoke-to-spoke cooperation, the US has been very keen over the last couple of administrations to encourage its allies and partners to work closer together. Just to highlight a couple of examples, I don't think we can go past the deepening Australia-Japan relationship. The Australian PNG relationship, now a little bit of a setback today, but I think we'll get there with the treaty as well. Our broader Pacific engagement. But also want to highlight, Australia's direct bilateral engagement with India, the Maldives, with Sri Lanka. I think it was really noteworthy that post-Shangri-La this year, the DPM, Richard Marles, got on a plane and went to the Indian Ocean. We expanded the Pacific Patrol Boat program to the Maldives. I think that was very encouraging. And then sitting on top of that spoke-to-spoke sort of cooperation, I think is the day-to-day deepening of the relationship bilaterally with the US that the officials and some of the people in this room just do on a day-to-day basis, based on that strategic directory as we heard it before, because of the structural changes that are affecting the relationship. That we need to offset that with a few of the changes, and I agree with the last panel, those structural changes will keep things bound together beyond the day-to-day politics. But I think we can finally probably say we've seen the end of the pivot or rebalance to Asia. Like that kind of era of US policy approach, I think, is finally kind of dead. The end of integrated deterrence in the US. So the previous administration looked at all domain, entire spectrum of conflict, whole of government approach, a comprehensive toolkit for deterrence in our region. And now I think we have what I would call disaggregated deterrence. It's not whole of government in the US. Economics is set apart from other strategic priorities. There's a lack of interagency process. And there's much more internal competition in the Trump administration for influence and direction on policy, which is, I think, how President Trump absolutely likes it to be, because he's the centre point of that sort of coordination. Now, that does drive some uncertainty, as we heard in the last panel. The US will stay engaged, just the terms on which it engages are changing, and we're not quite sure what that is yet. And like the business community, the strategic community likes certainty, even though it's trying to manage uncertainty. And I think it just makes it a little bit more uncertain. We do know that I think US policy is more Northeast Asia focused than it's been in a long time, more military focused on the deterrence side, more Taiwan scenario focused. But also beyond that, it's actually, the US or the White House is distracted by Ukraine and the Middle East at the moment. And it kind of feels almost like a move from integrated deterrence with this president to kind of short-term media cycle deterrence, for want of a better phrase. So there's a mixture of continuity, but a mixture of sort of change as well we're trying to deal with.
Okay, Lavina.
Well, I think Peter and Lisa have already spoken quite comprehensively about the real continuity that's still going on underneath the level of politics. So we're all very focused on signalling from the United States about its commitments to this region, commitments to alliances. So I think I'll leave that there. I'd like to just think about what's been happening in Europe. I think from my perspective, when you look at what's happened amongst the NATO allies, that the NATO allies are now seriously preparing for war. This is something that previous administrations have tried and encouraged the European allies to do this, and they're now responding. And I think they recognise that they're up against an authoritarian axis. They can see it very clearly in the Ukraine crisis, and we are now, I think, in that phase, allies here in this region, needing to grapple with that. What are the possible consequences of that authoritarian axis for our region? For me, I think the emphasis, apart from the continuity that we see, the emphasis, I think, is on getting more serious about developing warfighting capabilities. And the standout to me is the US, Australia, Japan, Philippines, closer cooperation between those 4 countries. I think they're all getting more serious about warfighting. And I think in the Indo-Pacific, I think Japan is the closest to our NATO allies in terms of having that mindset about preparing for war. I think it accepts that these preparations for war, rather than signalling, is the essence of deterrence going forward.
Okay. Lisa, can I ask you, you mentioned about US military exercises with India. I think Indian troops, however, were also exercising in Belarus over the past week. I think there was an element of that as well. I'm wondering what you think about some of the more alarmist, if you like, interpretations about the Quad, given Modi's visit to China, and has it set back US-India relations by a generation, as some people are saying, or how do you see it?
Well, I mentioned in the previous panel that we had a positive development in President Trump phoning Prime Minister Modi yesterday, wishing him a happy birthday. His birthday is actually today, auspicious day for the Indo-Pacific. But I do want to mention what's at stake in the US-India relationship, and the fact that if US-India relations were to keep deteriorating as they have been over the last couple of months, this would be very negative for the Quad. Without India and the India-US relationship, it would be very difficult to have a productive Quad moving forward. And frankly, the US Indo-Pacific strategy writ large would suffer. India is important. India, fastest growing economy in the world, 4th largest military, or 4th most powerful military, largest country, a lot of soft power in the global south, a country that is willing to stand up to Chinese coercion. So it's really important that the US continue to invest in its relationship with India. Look, over the last 25 years, Republican, Democratic presidents alike have invested in this relationship because they have understood the logic of India being, a rising power and a democracy, a maritime power that also is extremely worried about the rise of China, or China trying to become the Asia hegemon. So I think that there is a lot at stake there, and I think that if the relationship was to continue to deteriorate, we would see the Quad stumble. And everything that's been put into the Quad over the last 8 years. Yeah,
with the debate over how robust the Quad is at this point in its life, Lavina, do you think if the leaders' meeting does not go ahead, if Trump is not interested, will that almost fatally undermine the Quad, or do you think it could survive in a meaningful form?
Okay, I'm kind of probably answering a little bit of Lisa's question as well. I think I'm more positive about the possibility that the India-US relationship will be repairable. I think I take Kurt Campbell's advice that Japan and Australia have agency here. So Albanese, when our Prime Minister goes to meet President Trump, that he should be talking about the importance of the Quad and mentioning some of the importance factors that Lisa just mentioned about why India is important. So I think the US and India really need each other. If if, as we can see, there is an introduction of a trust deficit between the US and India that has been so carefully cultivated, that relationship, for so long, I think the trust deficit between China and India is much deeper. So I can't see in the long term that that can be overcome immediately or overnight. It might seem like the optics are moving one way, but in the long term, I think geostrategically, I just can't see that being overcome. India does not want to be a subordinate to the United States. So putting that aside, I think, leaders' meetings are important. They signal priorities, they signal commitment, and I think that there will be a rapprochement of sorts. There will be a negotiation. I think we can continue. And I think keeping on that theme, I think we just have to remember what the Quad was created for. So it was about the four most capable democracies coming together to shape the region in material and non-material ways to counter what China was doing to undermine the regional order. I think, unfortunately, the Quad has been a bit distracted. I do appreciate the public goods aspect of the Quad, that softer face that the Quad has been promoting in our region. But I think it has resulted in the strategic focus of the Quad dissipating. So for me, I think it's time for the Quad to consider quite seriously introducing closer defence cooperation. And I don't think that that's a kind of insurmountable hurdle. I think that in the many war games that I've participated in the last few years, China always wins. Why does China always win? One, it likes to or is more willing to escalate. But two, it is because allies run out of things. We run out of munitions, we run out of missiles, we don't have enough assets to deploy. So I think deterrence now, as much as anything, is now about being able to demonstrate the capability to sustain a protracted war. And this is where I think if we want to actually seriously have an impact on deterrence by denial, the Quad has a role. The Quad can be building defence cooperation in terms of collective military industrial capacity, resilience of our military and non-military supply chains, operational coordination, and defence planning consultation. So a 4+4, why not?
Okay, thank you. I want to change the topic now to AUKUS. Peter, the great guessing game, given that the President hasn't really said much about AUKUS, we've got the Colber Review, we've had, notwithstanding Kirk Campbell's admonishment to the Fourth Estate for misreporting it, where do you think AUKUS is sitting now? What can we expect and how might it change with this review?
Look, AUKUS continues on. It's interesting, I mean, the US in particular and Australia is watched very closely, and anyone who says anything is analysed to death. And I think we've heard about the death of AUKUS about 52 times now from different commentators and parts of the media. I think where we're at the moment is, I refer to my earlier point about the lack of kind of interagency process. I think that's how the AUKUS review from the Pentagon started. But I think if you look at the difference between the announcement of that and the now conduct of that, you're seeing it built back into that interagency process about it being gripped up through the different parts of the US system and by Congress, flexing its own interests in this particular area. On the back of that, the very good announcement from the Albanese government about the reforms to HMAS Sterling, and they're important not just because of AUKUS, that's actually a massive sovereign defence capability investment on our own part. That's the first point. It has AUKUS benefits on top of it, but that's fundamentally an Australian sovereign investment. But I think what we're seeing is a bit of issues around expectations and commitments. Australia wants to sort of guarantee as much as it can about the sale of Virginia-class submarines. The US wants in return access to basing, Sterling, maintenance and repair, sustainment, and then investment in their industrial base. And it's starting to ask some hard questions about commitments, most of which political commitments in potential conflicts. But I have to say, most of which are hard questions that they have not resolved internally for themselves. They can't give an answer to the same questions that they're asking. Now, all of this is, I think, is to be expected, right? AUKUS is based on a series of political discussions and decisions that are ongoing, as all pacts of this type are. So we shouldn't expect sort of anything different. But I think it's important to reflect sometimes, what are we getting out of it and what's the direction it is? I mean, Australia is getting a whole new capability. A diesel submarine and a nuclear submarine are not the same thing, right? It's like comparing a frigate to an aircraft carrier. They are both ships, but they are not the same capability. They are worlds apart in power, range, endurance, impact and strategic importance. And I just want to highlight one thing like the endurance factor. People say, oh, but we're only getting, we'll only be able to operate a couple of them at any given time. Endurance really matters to Australia. Range really matters given our geography. And just to give you one example, a UK Vanguard class nuclear submarine this year finished a record-breaking 204-day patrol in March of 2025. You can't do that in a Collins-class submarine. That is just impossible. So in the event of an immediate deterrence issue, a crisis or a conflict, you can deploy these assets to very far off distances or close to Australia for very long periods of time. So this is sort of a ground-breaking capability. And Australia is also getting a transfer of intellectual property out of this. So we're talking 8 decades of development worth innovation and expertise worth tens of trillions of dollars is being transferred to Australia at the cost of billions of dollars. No matter how you look at it, that's a good deal, right? It's like if you imagine Microsoft partnering with another country in a smaller country in the region and transferring all of its chip, software and computing technology, including manufacturing capability, for a fraction of the cost. I mean, it's a pretty epic scale. But this is also guaranteeing an investment back on the US side into their industrial base and to building, as the US has been trying to do, greater capacity in its partners. And I think this is very much in the Trump vision of the world. We become more capable as a result of this. And I think just quickly, what we're seeing as a little bit of a bump though, is the difference between deterrence expectations around AUKUS. Australia is really committed, our government, to what I would call general deterrence. Long, persistent efforts to prevent war and unwanted actions over the long term. Parts of the Pentagon at the moment are invested in immediate deterrence, that is, short-term, urgent messages to prevent an immediate attack like on Taiwan in the next year or two. That's where it means you get different priorities as a result of that. But you've got to do both, right? It's not one or the other. And I think that's what's working its way through the system. Because immediate deterrence, it erodes long-term capability and resilient preparedness. But if you don't do enough of it and don't have the readiness to do it, it potentially leaves an opportunity open to your adversary.
And Lisa, can I ask for an American perspective here? I mean, it's often said that AUKUS is the ultimate test of US loyalty to Australia to a degree, because of the clause of the US president saying 2031 could turn around and say, no, our Navy is going to be undermined if we do this, we're not going to sell the submarines, etc., etc. What do you think, the view from Washington, about what the Trump administration really thinks about it?
Great, thank you. I think Peter did an excellent job of talking about what all 3 countries get out of the AUKUS initiative, and there's a lot that's happened already on AUKUS. A lot of legislation that has moved forward to loosen up the export control, U.S. export control regime to make it easier for AUKUS to move forward. Australia has invested $1 billion in the U.S. defense industrial base. Like, this ship has sailed. Things are already happening. Things are already moving. And I do hear a lot of support for AUKUS among the Congress. There's been a lot of new legislation introduced to help AUKUS move forward even more quickly and faster. And the State Department. We hear a lot of support from the State Department for AUKUS and moving it forward. And I think there's just, 1 or 2 individuals who I won't name, but that have raised questions. And, that question of, well, does the U.S. have enough capacity to be able to support transferring Virginia-class submarines to Australia in the 2030s? And so I think that, while that question has been raised, and it does make sense for a review to happen because this is a new administration and they should, make it their own, and maybe we'll see some changes on timelines, maybe some changes to Pillar 2 areas of focus. I think by and large, AUKUS will stay intact and move forward. I see too much strong support on both sides of the aisle for the initiative. So I feel optimistic that it'll stay on track.
Okay, that's interesting. Lavina, can I ask you for an unusual question that often isn't raised in the AUKUS debate, but a very Australian question? Public support for AUKUS in Australia is crucial going ahead, given the eye-watering costs.
Right.
And the rubber hasn't hit the road yet, because there will be budgets that need to be curtailed in other areas to pay for defence, to pay for AUKUS. That's a debate that we're going to see coming in Australia we haven't really seen. Yet the government is reluctant to even mention the word China when discussing AUKUS. Is that good enough? Do you think the Australian government needs to do more to explain and promote the reasons for AUKUS, the real reasons, rather than what we're hearing at the moment?
Look, I think that is a problem. There is a problem, a bit of a reluctance to be completely honest about all aspects of the problem. But I do think that that's becoming more difficult. It just is. We've already had Andrew Shearer give us a very sobering analysis of the deteriorating security circumstances, to put a very gloss on over what's happening here. But I do think maybe an approach that could be taken is what Pete was just speaking about, to be much more clearer about what Australia gets out of this. So it's not necessarily about giving a pre-commitment, yes, we will use these 4 submarines in a war in the Taiwan Strait. I don't think any country would pre-commit. We have never done that in the past, and I don't think it's reasonable to be asked to do that now. And we're not even certain what the United States necessarily will do. So that in itself is a point to make. But we don't get enough of what Pete just spoke about what exactly are we getting out of it? Why do we need that submarine capability? What advantages does it give us in terms of deterrence by denial? And how does it, if we think that it is expensive, we need to also quantify what the costs to Australia are of not deterring. If there is an actual outbreak of war, what cost will that be to the Australian way of life, our economy, etc.? So I don't think we'll ever be bystanders in this. And if there is anything we should be doing, is to be convincing the Australian people that the investment is warranted.
Now, the most newsworthy topic relating to alliances in the region today is PNG. Peter, at the moment we've had a setback. The government, the Australian government, says it's only procedural. Once they get the New Guinea cabinet together, it will be agreed, the security deal between Australia and Papua New Guinea. Is this going to be a sort of model that Australia is going to try and recreate going forward? What does it say about the mindset in the region strategically that Australia feels it needs to do this?
Well, I think it's important to remember that PNG came to us to start this conversation. So this is a sovereign act by PNG that meets both of our countries' strategic interests. And I am confident that this issue that we're in at the moment with the communique instead of the treaty signing today, it's a political process. And it's a part of strategic competition. It won't always go linear and it won't always be smooth, but I think we will get there in the end. I mean, PNG is absolutely essential and critical from Australia's view of the region. Ever since colonial settlement in Australia, we have been worried about another foreign power whose interests are not aligned to us getting a foothold in the South Pacific. That's enduring, and it will remain enduring. Geostrategic competition, like we haven't seen in a very long time, is resonant in the Pacific. Pacific Island states see that, but I also think they see us. I mean, we're a resonant power along with them in the Pacific. We're a part of the Pacific family. We are the biggest aid donor to Papua New Guinea. We have we've celebrated the 50 years of independence of PNG, which is a process we partner with them on. I think if you look at what the government's done in some other states, Nauru and others around the region, this is the kind of model that not only Australia wants to push forward into the Pacific, but is warmly welcomed by a number of states in the Pacific as well. I think this is an enduring, ongoing part of strategic competition which is happening across the region. And it's basically where we're at. That I think we've shown that we've been more adept at negotiating Pacific politics much better than China has, for instance. The Pacific Islands Forum is a key forum for Pacific nations. We work through that forum. They try to undermine that forum. We know that development aid comes with catches and limitations to it, unlike the good governance that we try and promote in the region. It will not stop, but I think this is a really important model. I really hope it comes off. And I really particularly like that it's the region partnering with us on their initiatives, not just on us going into the region to talk about these issues.
In that context, Lisa, would you agree that the US has withdrawn to a degree from the South Pacific region, to the extent that during the Biden administration there were very high-profile visits? Under this current administration, you've had cuts to US aid, which have affected the region. You've had a smaller State Department, less of a footprint. A, what do you think about that? And B, do you think that is a trajectory that will continue, or do you think that the US will sort of lift again?
Well, I think you're right. I think we're not seeing as much focus on the Pacific Islands that we saw during the Biden administration, and sort of the whole government approach, like you said, not a focus on diplomatic missions, opening diplomatic missions, not a focus on assistance or, maritime assistance. And so I think that that's right, that there has been less of a focus, but I'm not sure that will last. I can envision the Trump administration, turning more toward the Pacific Islands. Again, we have to wait and see what comes out of the National Defense Strategy, the National Security Strategy. But I think given the importance of the Indo-Pacific in, competitiveness with China, that eventually, the Trump administration will have to focus more resources on Pacific Island strategy. And, I would just mention that it was during the first Trump administration where the Pacific Islands first started getting some real attention. I mean, before then, there was virtually no attention. But, I witnessed that attention developing during the first Trump administration. So, yes, I can envision it coming back or, coming into play more.
Okay. With my last few minutes left, I wanted to ask you all, if you could just give a brief take on the ultimate relationship that we care about, the US-Australian relationship. I mean, to look at it right now, you could argue two ways. You could argue, look, it's looking a bit rubbery at the moment. Albo is finally looks like probably going to meet it with Trump, but we've had a lot of angst about that. We had a bit of uncertainty about AUKUS, we had the tariffs, etc., etc. So on the political level, you could argue that it's not as robust as it was. But then you look at what's happening in the reality level, I guess, with more troops coming, Marines in the north, the preparation of the submarine base, etc., a very different outlook. I'm just wondering if you could each just give a short summary of where you think it's at. Should we be concerned? Is it an alliance? Is it strengthening? Where's it at? Lavina?
Look, I think it is a difficult time. You have to admit that it is a difficult time, but I think there's an opportunity. Our Prime Minister has secured a meeting next week. I think we have to go into it understanding that the United States mindset under this administration has changed. So it is definitely much more serious about competing in this region, much more serious about the prospects of war. And I think we need to make a case to the United States as to how we contribute. So the United States talks that the current administration is all about burden sharing, and also undervaluing, I think, alliances. So we have to go there with a case for why, beyond our geography, Australia contributes to the strength of the United States. So I do think we have to, I know we've made, the government has made an announcement about AUKUS. about $12 billion worth of investment. That is all good. I think we just need to do more of that and meet, I think, a bit more halfway. If Pete was talking about immediate deterrence and general deterrence, I think we need to show a demonstrative contribution to both and to go there in that meeting and demonstrate that.
Okay. Peter?
Oh, look, as we discussed today, this is an era of profound strategic change, and that era is now being reflected in change in the US domestic body politic. Someone mentioned the Guam or the Nixon Doctrine earlier. If you go back and look at, how Australia responded to that, which was a big shift in US policy into the region, we had a Prime Minister at the time who was publicly pontificating about Fortress Australia and getting nuclear weapons in public without consulting with his cabinet and without going through a policy process. What I'm saying there is we don't need to catastrophize about it. I agree with the last panel that the US will stay engaged in the region. The terms of that engagement may change, and we need to go through a sophisticated policy development partnership to understand that, to work with the Americans on what that looks like, and calibrate and adjust out of that. Out of the Nixon Doctrine came the Defence of Australia approach in it, era in Australia. Now we're into a different era. We're still in that shake-up of what that looks like, but I think the structural factors drive the US will stay engaged. We've got to understand how the terms of that will change and how we respond and calibrate in Australia to that. I do think, if anything, I think we should be forward-leaning, even more forward-leaning with our partnerships and providing options to the US and investing in our own national resilience.
Lisa?
Yes, thank you. So I agree with Lavina that this upcoming meeting between the Prime Minister and President Trump is an opportunity. And so I hope that is the way it's seen, because I've heard a debate while I've been here in Australia. One camp, I think, says, let's just play this very safe. It's a very unpredictable US president. Let's try to make Australia kind of go under the radar, not get noticed, and just allow the relationship to maybe cool for the next few years. There's another camp that says, let's find some real areas of cooperation. I've already said I'm optimistic about AUKUS, but there are other areas for the US and Australia to focus on. It doesn't have to be AUKUS all the time. Everything. There are so many areas. Our alliance has been longstanding, and there are areas, critical minerals, other ways to get at deterrence. And I think that the first option, the fly under the radar option, it would be very risky for Australia. I think that it makes more sense to try to find those areas of cooperation, forge ahead. Yes, President Trump is unpredictable. Yes, it's a different moment than we have seen ever. But I think it's a less risky option for Australia to forge ahead, to try to find those opportunities to cooperate with the Trump administration. And I think that there will be you will see the alliance continue, sustain. There's a lot holding it together, between our militaries, between our diplomats, and that we can, be optimistic about the future.
Yeah, well said, well said. Lavina, Peter and Lisa, thank you so much. Can everyone please thank our panellists today?